Okay, a warm welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley Sunday Forum for those joining us on Zoom and for those joining us in person. My name is Alex Havasi. I'm Vice President of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a reality-based secular philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you've not done so already. Membership forms are available on our website. A special welcome to those who are with us for the first time. We invite you to continue listening to our weekly forums and other events. You can find all our events on our website. And please help us to continue presenting these forums by donating to the Humanist community. You can find out how to donate on our website again, and that is www.humanists.org. That's humanist plural. Okay, roughly 1% of the people on Earth have left their country for fear of war or persecution. And that's for a variety of reasons, such as race, religion, nationality, membership to a particular social group, or political opinions. Scott Wakefield will discuss why the number of refugees is increasing, where they come from, where do they end up, and what is their situation. And is it our problem as humanists and as Americans? Scott?
Thank you for coming. Thank you for that introduction, Alex. Away we go. Let's see, I have to change.
Did you tell, does Matt know he should be recording?
We're recording. Okay. A refugee is someone for whom the denial of asylum has deadly consequences and have fled their country and been given protection in another. So in this slide, we're showing the number of displaced people and a subset of about 65 million people, and a subset of them, say 40 million, this is 2017 from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Yes, okay. And a subset of those are people who are still inside the country where they're fearing persecution. About 40 million, about 25 million are refugees. And then there are asylum seekers, so they haven't yet been given protection. Now, this is, I had to resist the urge to talk about the history of refugees. So as of now, the US asylum policy governed by the Refugee Act of 1980. According to this act, the president will consult with Congress to set the refugee resettlement ceiling, and they'll do that each year. Here we're showing the refugee resettlement ceiling. That's the line that's on top. And then underneath it, of course, it has to be less than that, is the number of actual refugees. And you can see that the ceiling has changed a lot from year to year. This is the 20 years before 2000, the 20 years after 2000. So the numbers are a couple 100,000, maybe 50,000. Then for a 4-year period here, for a particular president's incumbency, it dropped a lot from 2016 to 2020. And then after 2020, it went back up again. One thing that many people are concerned about is admitting terrorists into the United States. So I wanted to talk about that just a little bit. So between 2021 and 2015, 700,000 refugees were resettled into the United States. 3 were arrested for planning terrorist activities. 2 of those did not intend any action in the United States, and the plans of the other suspect were described as barely credible. Just to go through this real quickly, how does someone get into the United States? How does someone qualify for asylum in the United States? I want to walk you through the 14 steps. It includes background checks, interviews, and medical screenings. It can take from 18 to 24 months. It takes longer if an asylum seeker requires extra vetting, and it also takes a little longer if the applicant is in a remote area of the world. So this is to ensure that an applicant qualifies as a refugee, is honest about their identity, and is not dangerous, as we mentioned. The first of these 14 steps is someone will register with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. They get fingerprinted, and special for Syria, they also can get an iris scan. So you need a well-founded fear of persecution based on religion, race, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. The second step is that the most vulnerable are eligible for resettlement in a third country like the United States. And this would include women and children at risk of abuse and exploitation, survivors of violence, those with serious medical needs, separated families. About, as Alex mentioned, 1% of refugees are considered for resettlement in a third country. And the US accepts the most refugees, except for that 4-year period I pointed out earlier. The third step is the US Department of State Resettlement Support Center. There's a bunch of them around the world. They'll make note of the background of an applicant and their personal information. The next step is the first of several security checks. There's a watch list for terrorists that the FBI maintains. You can get on that list if you're involved with a crime or if you've had some dealings with a terrorist organization. Then there's a security advisory opinion by intelligence and law enforcement agencies. That's an additional security check. Then there's something called the National Counterterrorism Center, which is several agencies. And that's for applicants within a particular age range. And that repeats all the way from security check number 1 through the last, which is entry into the United States. Now, for applicants from Syria, there's an enhanced review. The feeling by the United States government is that Syria is a source of terrorism. And if they're suspicious, then that applicant's case is passed to the Homeland Security Fraud Detection Unit. We're about halfway through. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services conducts an in-person interview. They'll fingerprint the applicant, take a photo, and check to see if the statements made by the applicant and the case file match the country's situation. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services needs to give its approval. This approval is conditional, depending on security checks and depending on medical screenings. The fingerprints are scanned by the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Defense. There's a medical examination to make sure there's no contagious disease and no public health threat. The applicant is assigned to a sponsor agency. The U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrations makes this assignment. The sponsor provides information to the applicant and helps adjust them to life in the United States. I just think this is so funny. I can't imagine. I mean, I need help from this organization. Sorry. Then there's a cultural organization, Classes on U.S. Society. I need to fit in. Classes on U.S. Customs. I just saw an episode of Silicon Valley where these two CEOs meet each other and they're, you know, like autistic or something. Anyway, so you need some cultural orientation. Finally, travel to the United States. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection will review documents and guess what? Security checks. Most asylum seekers are from Central and South America. There's some from the Middle East and Africa, and often they'll come through South America. They'll be asked by Customs and Border Protection, do you fear persecution in your own country? That's our definition. And if yes, then the Citizenship and Immigration Services has to determine, are the claims convincing? And if so, then they have the right to present their case before an immigration judge. Here's the rub, 700,000 people, that's how long the backlog is. In immigration and customs enforcement detention centers, you could be there for more than a year. According to a report from the Homeland Security Inspector General report, I'm sorry, 5 years old, that there's a long wait for medical care, the bathrooms are unsanitary, and there's the attitudes from the guards is abusive. Now, when you're in the immigration court, there is no free public defender, unlike other courts in the United States. You can be released on bond before hearing. So people with money, may have a better experience. Many of these people do not speak English. Many never learn of their right to a bond hearing. While 2 out of 3 have no lawyer. If you do have a lawyer, you're 5 times more likely to receive asylum. Depending on the immigration court, you might be deported. And that can vary depending on which immigration court you are trying to work with. If you're in Charlotte, North Carolina, 84% of the applicants are deported. If you're in San Francisco, California, 36% are deported. Now, here's a picture of a former Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, during the administration of a former president. And he said that he was going to adopt immediately a zero tolerance policy for all offenses related to the misdemeanor of improper entry to the United States. He said, if you smuggle illegal aliens across the border, then we'll prosecute you. If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you, and that child may be separated from you, probably, as required by law. Now, here's a quote from that administration's senior advisor on immigration policy. His name was Stephen Miller. If we don't enforce this, it is the end of our country as we know it. He also said that opposing it would be un-American. And I have here a little portrait of Stephen Miller. The number of separated immigrant children. Well, how many are there? How bad is this problem? And the Department of Homeland Security on the 15th of June said there were 1,995. That same month, the Health and Human Services Secretary said there were 2,047. Amnesty International pointed out that the number excludes separation from grandparents. And the Homeland Health and Human Services Office of the Inspector General said that the next year that it involves thousands more. And one report in October of that year said there were 5,500. Okay, so let's see. During a brief, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kirsten Nielsen, was giving a briefing. ProPublica had posted a recording of children just after being separated from their parents. And a reporter who was at that briefing, Olivia Nuzzi from New York Magazine, played the tape. And here's a quote from someone: a lot of Republicans I talked to, even bundlers, so that's a political operative, people that put big amounts of money together, that's what a bundler is, said when they heard the cries of the children without visual being separated, that was the moment where America knew that this was too far. And that's when the president retreated. Okay, I want to talk about a couple of countries in particular. As I said, I'm not doing history. There's just so much material. I just want to kind of get the conversation started. So let's talk about Palestine. These people became refugees during the period 1947 to 1949 Palestine War. 1948 was the Palestinian expulsion and flight. And another period when there was a lot of refugees was in the Six-Day War in 1967. So the United Nations Relief and Works Agency registered 5 million, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East registered 5 million refugees. 1.5 million live in camps run by the UNRWA. There's about something more than 1 million who are not registered. just to kind of enumerate where they went, a couple million went to Jordan, 400,000 to Lebanon, 500,000 to Syria, about 100,000 of those are in camps, 700,000 to the West Bank, which is administered by Israel, and 1 million and more in the Gaza Strip, administered by the Islamic Resistance Movement, or Hamas. We'll just look at the first three of these countries. So in Jordan, mostly from the West Bank, a couple million, 300,000 living in camps. That's the lowest percentage of all that are registered with the UNRWA. Relief and Works Agency, the UN Relief and Works Agency. All of them, except for 100,000 or so, have citizenship. So 50% of Jordan's population now has roots in the Palestinian roots in the West Bank. That's Jordan. Lebanon, 400,000. Now, this is so interesting. I'm just repeating here what I read. I don't really know what it means. Lebanon has a system of government called confessional government, which, according to what I saw, is a mix of religion and politics. So if they granted citizenship to Palestinians, that would upset the political balance. And a couple things I found out about that in the 1950s and the 1960s, 50,000 Christian refugees were granted citizenship. Then in the mid-90s, 60,000 Shiite Muslim refugees were granted citizenship. And then I guess there was a protest, and so now all Christian refugees are granted citizenship. So boy, there's a lot to... Okay, Syria, another country. There was a civil war in Syria in 2011, so a lot of these refugees were displaced, 200,000 within Syria. Some years later, 100,000 fled Syria to Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, and further. One interesting thing I noticed is that Sweden offered asylum to any Syrian refugee that was able to reach Sweden. So that was the Palestinians, and the last refugee crisis I want to concentrate on is Ukraine. It had 41 million people in 2022 when it was invaded. About 6 million fled to Europe. About 8 million are internally displaced, and 4.5 million returned back to Ukraine. In all, it's about a quarter of the population, 90% of these people were women and children. It's the largest European refugee crisis since World War II. They initially went to Ukraine, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. I love maps. 3 million then went further west. 900,000 relocated to Russia by force, passing them off as refugees. 150,000 children entered the Russian adoption system. So those that went to the EU, the European Union Temporary Protection Directive, allows an initial stay of 1 year. We just looked at this. And now just to sum up, these are the 10 largest refugee crises. And of course, World War II and World War I are big on this. The partition of India in the 1940s, 10 to 20 million people. So the invasion of Ukraine, as we said, it's high on this list, 9 million people. The Bangladesh Liberation War in 1971, 9 million people. Venezuela, I wish I could tell you more about these. I'm ignorant myself. 7 million people in 2014. Syrian Civil War, we mentioned that, 6 million people. Soviet-Afghan War, 6 million. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict that we looked at, 5 million, and that's still going on. So the right-hand column is until, and that's the present. And the Vietnam War in 1975, about 3 million people. So you can see that of the top 10 largest refugee crises in history, 4 of them are still going on. And that's a lightning run through refugee crises. And I open it up for discussion. I wouldn't say that I'm going to answer questions. I've studied this a bit, and maybe I know a little bit. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I was curious when we decide we're not going to offer someone refuge and we deport them. Do we send them back to their original country, back to Syria, or?
Don't
Okay.
know.
Yeah.
If you could have that answer about Thursday.
The comment was, can you have that answer by Thursday? Yes, if you want, you can present us with a lot of questions and we'll email you the response. Senna, oh, you had an announcement. I was supposed to get back to you earlier.
Hi. Well, thank you for a very enlightening talk. And with your multitude of friends, I am surprised you've kept this under wraps, I'm afraid, that you would be talking to us. And do you have a printout or anything of that somewhere that we can go online and get it?
Yes.
It's a horrible situation. And for me to sit here and announce the gift table after listening to that, it makes me feel guilty. But there are things here for people, anybody wants to pick something. And the other situation is we had hoped to put together a solstice dinner of some establishment, some size, but that didn't seem to come together well. And after the success of our Thanksgiving, before Thanksgiving thing, which was very successful. So I've got more, but I think anybody who we've got a sign-up sheet. If anybody's interested, we'll be getting together on the 21st or 22nd at the Pacific Catch around 2 on one of those 3 days. So, and thank you again so much.
Thanks for setting up that party, Senna.
Yes, and I apologize for not calling on you for asking for announcements earlier. Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, did you list how many refugees there are in Mexico, just outside the United States, waiting across in the US?
Good question.
Do you know if it's on in there? I don't think I saw it.
I don't think it's in there.
Also, you didn't point out one thing I thought is significant, which is that the total number of refugees is about 1% of the world population. That would add up to 80 million, which is about a quarter of the United States.
That is a lot of people. Was there a hand?
Yes, behind you.
Excuse me.
How recent is the data?
Yeah, it's years old.
Huh?
It's years old. One of them I noticed was 27.
No, I say how recent is the data?
It's old.
Old, okay.
Yeah.
And what is your data source?
A lot of it's from the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, and others is books and articles that I've found.
Also, the persecution being grounds for asylum. Does that mean all the gays in Russia would have asylum here and a few countries in Africa?
I think there are some people who would definitely fear for their lives.
They do?
Yes,
And they do qualify. At
I
least
would
some of
say
them.
so.
It's not easy to get in from what you say, but.
Right.
Basuma?
It seems like there are also, I would assume, there are also refugees in Africa. For example, in Nigeria, the Lagos War, or also Congo. Do you have any information on them?
No.
Yeah, I think we're at a situation, we could name a lot of places that have produced refugees, but we don't have a lot of information other than that. Yeah, Paul.
When I assume the Congress sets that annual quota?
Right, in consultation with the president, that's right.
You know what time of year that's done,
I
or
don't know.
at the beginning, but it's annual?
Yeah.
Has it been done this year?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it just an overall quota that's set and somebody else determines the distribution? Or-
I think the history of this is so interesting. It used to be on a country by country basis. And during different periods, there were exceptions. There's something called parole. The president can parole people. So in the early 1950s, in Hungary, there were tens of thousands of people that Eisenhower paroled. Cuba, under Eisenhower, through Johnson, Cubans, 100,000 people. So every so often, and then they went, that was like, and then in 65, they did away with country by country quotas.
As I remember the chart there, the number that's allowed has been dropping.
It dropped from like 2016 to 2020, and then it went back up to about 100,000, went down to, I forget, 45,000 something.
Okay.
Okay, Jerry?
I'm so happy that we have people in the audience, I mean, who have personal experience. I shouldn't be the one giving this talk.
Yeah, so, and I also assume that 2016 was a big drop from way back when everybody was going through Ellis Island.
Good point. Yes. Isn't the history so interesting? I mean, there was the Chinese Exclusion Act. You know, at one point it was anyone who was white and free could enter the country. And yeah, it's so fascinating.
Is there any distinction made between expatriate and refugee? How do you define refugee versus people, like, for example, from Syria? People leave because of the war, a civil war, but will they be considered people who are leaving the devastated area? Are they considered refugee or expatriate?
The words I have here are refugees are people for whom the denial of asylum has deadly consequences. That's a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah, I understand the term expatriate refers to anyone not living in his home country.
I didn't quite hear.
Oh, I say my understanding is that an expatriate is just anyone who's not living in his home country. And probably does not refer to people on vacation. Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, and I guess the reason you get a lot of refugees from Central and South America is because they can get here just by walking. It's a long walk, but they can do it. Whereas if you're coming from anywhere else, you got to figure out how to go across the oceans.
There's some just heartbreaking testimony of people walking here and they say, oh, I see a body floating in the river. You know, I see body parts. It's pretty upsetting, yeah.
Yeah, you may have covered this, but as someone of European background, it seems like anyone could come into the country, certainly up through the early 1900s. When did all that change and how?
Okay, we need to do another talk on the history of
Okay.
immigration.
Masuma.
So do you have data on also like El Salvador, Nicaragua? Those are the areas also went through civil war.
That's right. That's right. No,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It might have been especially bad because our guys came to power and generated refugees.
Yeah, I just wanted to recommend a movie that I think I assume it's fictional, but El Norte is about a couple of refugees who came to the United States because their parents were killed by the current government and they had to get out. I know they were in Central America. Which one? I'm not sure. It might have been Guatemala. but it's amazing depiction. And in fact, there's a scene in there where one of them is a waiter in an upscale restaurant in Los Angeles, and it looks like absolutely luxury. This is a place I would have figured was, okay, it's upscale if I visited before the movie, but after the movie, it was like, this place is unbelievable. It's very good at giving you a different perspective of what it's like for the refugee. And what happens to the sister is awful.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry.
Oh, looks like we've lost the camera. Looks like we've lost the camera. I don't know why.
Is there someone from Mountain View?
This is.
Oh,
this
that's
is-
us.
That's the camera, yeah.
Son of a gun.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, Dana.
Over the 23 years that I taught English to foreigners, I heard a lot of stories. And one of the things I heard frequently that it was easier to get into Canada than the United States. So a lot of them would go to Canada first and get their citizenship there. And then they would come into the United States that way. And that was one way. And I certainly heard stories too about people that had contracted terrible tropical diseases and stuff. And they would have to stay out of the country for like a year or 2 years or however long it would take to cure them of their condition before they could even set foot in the country. So, but you know, I wonder how much the pressure on the United States and other developed countries is. It seems like there must be more now. I mean, I know there have been wars all through the 20th century and certainly in the 21st, but boy, there's just a staggering number of refugees.
Zim, I see you had your hand up.
Yeah, gosh, so many questions. I'll just ask one, I guess, or maybe two. One. So, not all refugees play by the same rules. So I was wondering if you could talk about the migration of Cubans into the United States and the migration of Jews from the USSR to the United States, which started it in the 1970s, and perhaps it's even going on right now, even though we don't have the USSR anymore. Can you comment on that? Are those two categories considered refugees?
Okay, I did come across some information on Cuba, which I didn't include in the talk, that yes, the US president was able to do something, they used the word pardon. And so 100,000 Cubans were able to come. And, you know, part of it is during the Cold War, that would make it easier for Cubans to get into the United States. And things change over the years. And I don't know anything about Russia.
Okay, Paul, did you have your hand up?
Do you have any data on the effect of immigration on the U.S. economy, specifically on the labor market, on one of the complaints I hear sometimes about allowing people in is the cost of public services. The other things sort of that nature. My sense of what I hear of people who are opposing immigration into this country sounds more like rank prejudice, and well, I'll leave it at that. Rather than the effect. And do we in fact need for the well-being of those of us who are already here? Do we need more immigration into the country? Is it a net positive that we have people coming in?
That's a provocative question. Yeah, very good question. And I don't know.
I think it's easy to get in if you have an engineering degree. Senna.
You can also buy your way in. Oh, is that right? Dana said that's what you have to do for Canada.
And early on, I don't know what the figures are on it now, but at the early part, they were rounding up lots of children, separating them, and they were keeping records supposedly of where they came from or where they could go back. And I think at least half of those records never produced anything for those children. They were just orphaned by the system.
I'm afraid that might be right, yeah. But back to what Paul was saying, I think that that's a really important question because certain politicians can get very popular by talking about building a big, beautiful wall. And I think that's what was behind Brexit, that a lot of people in the UK, wanted to separate so that people couldn't come into the country anymore.
Dana.
And it had big economic consequences, as you point out.
Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate on the Canada thing. My mother was Canadian and I have lots of Canadian relatives. And so at one point I considered immigrating to Canada. Actually, whenever I looked at our political situation, I considered immigrating into Canada. But and I kind of looked into it, and they sent me the information, and so they have a way of rating your appropriateness. And like what is your age and what is your marital status and what is your profession. So if you were a teacher at the time that I was looking into it, that was not one that they needed more of. But they did need more social workers. You could get 18 points for that. And that was one of my previous incarnations. And I thought, whoa, and then in addition, you had to have a certain amount. I think it was $250,000 so that it didn't become a burden on their medical system. Yeah, so I don't know whether we have that kind of setup or not.
I think, yeah, there are loopholes like that.
It seems to me there was something about in the early days where we had a lot of, except before all these refugees, and when people were just coming to this country because they could and they wanted to, they were asked if they had $40 on them.
Oh.
Also, my impression is that up until quite recently, Germany was a real haven for refugees. They had a lot of refugees. And it was
Yes,
easy
I've
to
heard
get
that
in.
too. Mhm.
I think that's changing now.
Is there a hand up on the screen?
I don't see it,
No.
but on my eyes are terrible. Yeah. Okay.
I remember seeing something, I don't know, it was a news program or documentary or whatever, but there was a time when Arizona was enforcing that anybody who was undocumented couldn't work. And there was a farmer with an orchard who needed to pick the fruit, and he couldn't get anybody because he couldn't hire undocumented, and documented people wouldn't work at the prices he could afford. So he's just sitting there with the trees, fruit unpicked.
Yeah, the criticism I've heard voiced about all these immigrants is they're all on welfare and they're stealing our jobs.
Maybe they're getting welfare and working.
Maybe they're doing both. Yes.
They're murderers, rapists.
That was a comment that came up at one of our meetings a while back. Do you think an American GI ever raped anyone? Maybe I shouldn't ask that question.
I think the answer is yes. I haven't got any evidence for that. Seems to be in the nature of the world. Probably so. You were an American. I was un-American. Believing such.
All right. The fight is going to break out here.
I got another
comment.
another
Okay.
movie to recommend.
Okay.
It's a bit hard to find, but I really love the movie A Day Without a Mexican. The basic story is that for a short period of time, there are no Mexicans anywhere in California. and how it affects things. And boy, you have a better appreciation of Mexicans after watching that.
Yeah, someone has to do the work. Masuma?
During the Vietnam era, a lot of people protested against war and had to leave the country, otherwise they will be persecuted. So a lot of them went to Canada. Were they considered refugees to Canada from the US?
Oh,
Oh, we have an answer from Jerry here.
the only risk to people in the Vietnam War was the ones who were of draft age. If you weren't going to be drafted, there wasn't a problem. So what happened is you had people going to Canada to avoid the draft, but they wouldn't be considered refugees, at least by Scott's definition. So they just didn't want to go. Their choices were basically go to jail, go to Canada, or go to Vietnam, or hope that the lottery left them out.
So I guess that's the situation in Russia now, people trying to avoid
Yeah.
military.
Yeah, I recall there was also a big difference between different draft boards where some of them it was easy to get out and others they just felt they needed more bodies. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't just draft boards. I mean, I knew a fellow who had to go to the Army's, the draft place, the medical, with the Army facility, which does the examination of you. And he and a bunch of other people on the bus going there were quite rowdy. And this was early on, and they were all exempted. We don't want these troublemakers. But later, people who did the same thing, they said, "Oh, we know your game. We're not going to take you. We're still going to take you." And then, of course, there's Alice's restaurant. Oh boy. Does everybody know about Alice's restaurant?
Sure, it's up on Skyline Road.
Yeah, this one's in Massachusetts. But Arlo tells the story about how basically because of littering, they ask him, "Are you moral enough to go fight?" And it's bizarre story, 18-minute song or so, but it's priceless.
It was good, and my favorite line was halfway through the song. He says, "But that's not what I came to talk to you about." Anna.
At the same time that a lot of countries have tightened their rules and are excluding certain kinds of refugees, I was talking to a man that I've known for a really long time. He has his own painting company, and he's originally Czech. And they walked into Austria and got out of the country about 40 years ago. And he came here, his family came here. And he said he was considering going back to Deutschland, Germany, because they were having a problem with so many of their farmers and everything moving into urban areas and leaving the small towns that are being drained of young people. Anyway, and they were offering certain benefits to people like him that were skilled and had, and he was a skilled like carpenter, painter, and all that kind of stuff. And he was seriously considering moving back to Germany because the government was offering him such a nice benefit package. And so I really have to wonder what's going on.
And of course, Anna and the captain and the children at the end of The Sound of Music, they just hiked over the mountains to get out of Austria.
I think they should rewrite the song. How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen TV? Jerry.
One of the weird stories about refugees is a number of people came to the United States from the Soviet Union. They were so happy to come to the United States, for the land of the free, but eventually they decided there was just too much freedom here and they wanted to go back, some of them. And I guess some of them did, because they just saw it as being too chaotic here. Oh.
Yeah, I noticed in the write-up for your talk, one of the questions was, what is our responsibility as humanists and as Americans? And the only thing I could think of is if you see something wrong, write your senator, write your congressperson, write the president. Senna.
I should have mentioned it of all those children that although there was a real effort made sometime after that to find the children, and a lot of them were returned. So it's not a total, but it is sad.
I was wondering how many of the children, put up for Ukrainian children put up for adoption in Russia. I wonder how many of what percentage of them actually spoke Russian. Okay, well, the question is out there. If anybody wants to send us an answer. Susan.
I want to apologize because I came sort of late, so I didn't hear anything, but I know the subject is refugees. And quite a while ago, I was volunteering at the Jewish Community Center. And there were, with a course, I was helping an instructor with a course to train or to give some assistance to people who were coming from Russia at that time. They're very highly educated people. I mean, there's doctors, professors, engineers, etc. But the biggest thing for them was how to even just talk to people one-to-one. How far away do you talk? It's different, the different things that she was teaching were just the practicality of just getting, doing an interview, writing a resume, things like that. And those were, they had so much education, but they were also getting jobs as housekeepers and, things like that, much below their status, but they had to survive. So it was an interesting group of people. I got to know some of the people during the process, very intelligent, obviously. And but I think they stayed in the United States. They didn't go back to Russia. They knew it was not better over there.
I guess that's what they teach you in the cultural class. There's a comment I had read somewhere quite a while back that in a lot of Arab cultures, they like to stand very close to you and look you in the eye as they speak to you. That would freak me out. Susan?
Also was hygiene and things like that, because a lot of people don't believe in deodorants in other countries, and it's important when you go into an interview, and it doesn't work here. Just a sample of another thing I could think of.
I think I'm thinking of a Monty Python skit where apparently they regard Americans as obsessed with cleanliness. Well, I don't see any more hands.
I was gonna make a comment,
Carl?
way off in the background here. No one mentioned the Vietnam influx, what happened to the Vietnam War. And I had, no one mentioned the Vietnam conflict, but I knew a fellow who was a technician in one of the labs, and he was a high-ranking economist in Vietnam, and he couldn't get a job here, so he became a tech. Anyway, and if anybody in engineering knows, that's not the highest possible paying job, but he did well.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Yeah, as I said, I don't see any more. Susan?
That triggered my knowledge of, I have a friend who is from Vietnam. She was a family, her father was in the military, pretty high ranking in the embassy. Actually, they were in Thailand in 1974, 75. April 75 was the end of the Vietnam War. He she was in junior college in Alabama, because that's where they sent her to get out of the country. And he called her on the phone and said, you have to get the president to get us out of Thailand, Vietnam, because things are really serious. He didn't mean the president of the United States. He meant the president of the college. And she did enable that to happen. She actually met with Governor Wallace, and he helped her and her family, the whole 8 of them or 9 of them, whatever there was, to come over, establish jobs. But in addition, there was a lot of help from the ministry, the church that they were involved in here. So the churches did help get people established here.
Oh, thank you. I'm cutting people off too quickly, huh? Dana.
When I was teaching, I had 2 different populations. If I was teaching night classes, I would have a lot of people from Latin America and Mexico who were restaurant workers. And they could come to class only in the evening, late evening. But for my day classes, I had, like Susan said, highly educated people. A couple of times I took surveys of the professions. And there was one time, I think I had in my classroom about 30 students, only one person was not a college graduate. And I had like 3 professors and 5 dentists and 2 doctors, and it was just many of them were spouses or family members of people who were visiting Stanford or working in the tech industry. And those were my day students, and they knew how to study. They were very successful students. And the night classes had a lot of problems because they would get injured at work. Their living situation was insecure and they would have to move. And they really had only gone through 2nd grade in their own country or something. And they didn't know that you were supposed to bring paper and a pencil to class and that sort of thing. So it's very different populations.
All right, so did you have anything further you wanted to say, Scott?
I really appreciate the insight from our audience with their personal experiences on this topic.
Jerry?
Yeah, I was just remembering you had a graph showing that the number allowed into the country dropped for quite a while, and then it went up sharply, just a few years ago. But it looked like the number of refugees actually let in was less than that. I'm a bit surprised. I always thought that the number of people who wanted to get in exceeded the number of slots available. Did I misunderstand the graph or something?
Right. It's the graph had 2 lines. One was the maximum allowable, and the other was how many actually got in. So the number that got in had to be less than the maximum allowable.
Right. So why was it that the number that were actually let in was a lot less than the number allowed?
Oh, I don't know that.
Okay.
Although judging from the rest of your talk, they're still in line.
Yes.
Dana?
While those figures are certainly alarming, from when we lived overseas, Germany had a lot of unaccounted for Gastarbeiters. They're called guest workers, and they're like what Latina people experience in this country. Very low wages, and they're like invisible, and it's illegal to hire them. But we met many people, especially young people, that were traveling around. The Australians like to do that, and they were all working, picking fruit and doing stuff in Switzerland and France. And in France, one of their biggest classes of kind of unknown population, illegal workers, is people from Algeria. And also they have a lot of gypsies. And so if I would walk into the village from where I lived, I would very often meet gypsies selling things on the road, like handmade lace or whatever they were making. And there was a huge population moving around of these gitans.
Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, Scott, I missed your presentation. I had technical difficulties. But I suppose it is the same presentation that you gave at Humanist at UUCPA, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So one question that I have is that I came here myself as a refugee from Russia. Yeah, and it was in 1990s. And my impression that it is now a lot of controversy about the requirement for refugees to expect a decision outside of the United States until this decision is granted. And when I came here in 1990s, it was just obvious that I had to stay in Russia until I had a positive decision. So my question is when, at what point, and why this became controversial? Or maybe I misunderstand something. So can you help me with this?
Would you repeat the question briefly?
This requirement for refugees to expect a decision before they are allowed to cross the border to the country.
The information I have, I didn't dive into the history, but that's the information I have. That's the procedure.
So did it change at some point between
I don't know.
then and now?
I don't
So-
know. Sorry.
And why was it okay then, and why it is not okay now? So I'm still
Yeah, good questions. Don't know.
yeah, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
Senna.
Yeah, we've been trying to think of a good way to let people know that we've taken enough time to so that the buffet can be opened. And we thought if we said after the pizza is cut, then the whole buffet is open. How's that sound to everybody? It's best we could come up with on Syria at the moment. And Paul agreed to that, if you've forgotten.
Okay, Jerry.
Yeah, I was at a company, a high-tech company in the late 70s, early 80s, and we had a Jew chem from from the USSR. And all I remember about him is he had to spend 3 months in Austria before he could come to America.
It doesn't sound like the worst place to spend 3 months. Dick.
I would just like to suggest as a follow-up to, because I think this is such a fascinating subject, that we invite an immigration attorney to speak to one of our meetings and answer some of these questions we have.
I know the one. Richard Hobbs, San Jose.
Masuma.
It just dawned on me like there is a huge influx of refugees from Myanmar, which was former Burma.
Right.
And it will be following up on him. It will be not important to know how refugees in different countries, coming from different countries, are treated differently. And there is this disparity in terms of treatment and accepting them or welcoming them. Like, if I recollect, even in France, someone migrating from Africa were less welcome than someone migrating from other part of Europe. Likewise, I remember even in Germany, similar thing happened. Like there was an article, I think New York Times, that someone who came from Ukraine was accepted right away, given a citizenship, but someone who came from Africa had to be in hiding because he was undocumented and couldn't get, even though he was also a refugee from the civil war in Africa. I forgot the name of the country, but he couldn't get accepted in Germany. So there are all these disparities. That's why I mentioned about Myanmar. The refugees from Myanmar coming to Bangladesh were not treated well either. So there are all these refugees, but some are welcome, some are not. And what are the political reasons? What are the sociological after effects of all these different kind of discrimination? It will be interesting to know.
Michael?
Yes, a follow-up on this question. So France, at least as I know, historically, that Algeria was a French colony. And according to the law, those who lived in Algeria, they were considered as citizens of France. And so they had sort of like special privilege. So they could arrive to France already as citizens, not as refugees or something. But that was originally. So I'd like to know what changed later. And I also would like to know what is in different countries, there's different requirements about immigrants from different countries. I suppose that there could be different requirements, right? Because, for instance, for refugees, there are specific expectations that in some countries, certain categories of people could be endangered, and so they would be more likely to be admitted as refugees. But how much of this is according to the law of the country? How much of this is sort of executive decisions or just some customs? I'd like to know more about this also. So that's a good question.